AskReddit by Pretend Stock Now. What high-profile person was ruined for trying to do the right thing? Frank Serpico was abandoned by his fellow cops after being shot, which was possibly a setup by the same cops, because he tried to expose corruption in the NYPD. His story was made into a movie with Al Pacino. Edited for clarity. I saw an interview with Serpico many years ago, but, also, decades after this all occurred, and he said he is still reviled by the local cops if he ever goes back to New York, or, at least, that area. The local corrupt cops completely wrecked Serpico with no repercussions to them. Ignacio Melwis first proposed hand washing when he noticed a drop in maternal mortality if he washed his hands. He became a pariah in the medical community, was violently committed to a mental asylum and died short after as a result of an infection of a wound he suffered while being committed. This is an understatement of the situation. Medical students were performing autopsies in the morgue immediately before assisting in the obstetrics ward. Only occasionally did they wash their hands, and even so, with only plain soap that did not get rid of the stench for days, as opposed to chlorinated lime. Up to 31% of patients were dying of postpartum infection after autopsies became part of education in medicine, whereas in another clinic staffed only by midwives, who did not perform autopsies, the rate stayed in the low single digits. Here is a telling chart from Wikipedia. https://upload.wikimedia.org/wikipedia/c/cf/yearly_mortality_178-4-1849.png?. Here is the Wikipedia article on the contemporary reaction to his theory. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/contemporary_reaction_ignas_semelwis. Not ruined in the sense of reputation or anything, but US Congressman Leo Ryan was killed trying to help people escape Johnstown. Can't imagine the atmosphere during that entire ordeal. Tangentially related, one of his staffers was also injured during the ambush on the delegation at the airport, Jackie Spire. She hid behind the plane wheels and was still shot 5 times and had to wait 22 hours before help arrived. She later ran for a congressional seat in 2008 that covered most of what used to be Leo Ryan and her boss's district. She retired from Congress last cycle. Brendan Fraser getting blacklisted in Hollywood because of rightly speaking out against getting groped by the head of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. There were other contributing factors to his career stalling, but that was a big slice of it. Thankfully we're now getting the renaissance we all deserve and, more importantly, that he deserves. Saw him narrate a Christmas show at Epcot last month. People camped out for hours and hours to get seats and he was beaming. Roger Boisjoli was largely drummed out of engineering for warning of the Challenger disaster in advance. Boisjoli correctly predicted, based on earlier flight data, that the O-rings on the rocket boosters would fail if the shuttle launched in cold weather. Morton Firecall's managers decided to launch the shuttle despite his warnings, leading to the catastrophic failure. 3. He was considered a high-profile whistleblower. 4. 5. Isolated from his colleagues who were redesigning the O-ring, his self-esteem suffered and he lost his confidence as an engineer. Boisjoli, who understood the potential consequences of an unsafe launch, had acted on his conscience in trying to prevent it. But Firecall executives didn't respect him as a valued professional. 6 months after the disaster, Boisjoli requested an extended sick leave. He never worked as an engineer again. 11. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Roger. Norm Macdonald was fired from SNL for his frequent topical O.J. Simpson jokes. By Donald Meyer. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Donald /Don_Olmar closed bracket. The best thing to come out of that was his legendary opening when they invited him back to host 18 months later and he just roasted them for 3 minutes in the most politely sarcastic way possible. Mohammad Mossadegh, Prime Minister of Iran. His administration introduced a wide range of social reforms. Unemployment compensation was introduced. Factory owners were ordered to pay benefits to sick and injured workers, and peasants were freed from forced labor in their landlords' estates. In 1952, Mossadegh passed the Land Reform Act, which forced landlords to place 20% of their revenue into a development fund. This development fund paid for various projects such as public baths, rural housing, and pest control. And probably the most important action he took, he nationalized the Iranian oil industry, which had been controlled by the British. Later the British, MI6, and Americans, CIA, overthrew his government during Operation Ajax. Man was sentenced to house arrest and was buried in his own home to prevent him from becoming a martyr. Ironically, in the end, both Brits and Americans were indirectly responsible for the rise of Ayatollahs to power. No indirect about it, the line is clear. Can't believe no one has said Pat Tillman yet. After 9/11, he left a very promising career in the NFL to join the US Army. He was a part of Operation Iraqi Freedom and later became a Ranger and was sent to Afghanistan. The Washington Post reported that Tillman said the war was fucking illegal. Not long after he reportedly spoke out against the war, he was killed by friendly fire, shot 3 times in the chest and head from less than 10 meters away. His unit reportedly burned his body armor in an attempt to hide what happened, and it was first reported that he was killed by enemy combatants. The army essentially knew that he was killed by friendly fire for weeks before they even told his family what really happened. Whether there was foul play or not is still up for debate, but the circumstances certainly seem to suggest an attempted cover-up. The army also held a church funeral for him, despite Tillman being an atheist who had specifically asked not to have one. John Krakauer's Where Men Win Glory is a fantastic book that goes in depth on Tillman's life, eventual death, and the aftermath. Highly recommended. Corey Feldman has been speaking out against CSA in Hollywood for decades. He has experience as a survivor and saw others go through worse. He got chewed out by Barbara Walters on TV for ruining careers and swept under the rug. Barbara Walters also tried to bully and slut-shame Dolly Parton. Dolly handled it with dignity, humor and grace, as usual. Stanislav Petrov. His career stagnated after he correctly chose not to push the big red button when a computer malfunction indicated 6 nuclear missiles were headed to Russia from the US. His career stagnated, and he was snubbed from any awards by the higher-ups who refused to admit their glorious technology malfunctioned. For 5 minutes, he held possibly the entire human race in the palm of his hand and chose not to fire because, as he stated, the US wouldn't fire 6 missiles. He correctly gambled the fate of his country on a coin flip. Before he died, he was commended by the UN, but never his own country. Oh yeah, I forgot this part. His wife died of cancer years after the event. But, due to the top secret nature of the incident, he never revealed to her the truth. I can't imagine the weight he felt. Eartha Kitt challenged both President Johnson and First Lady Lady Bird Johnson at a luncheon. She asked the president how working parents how they were supposed to prevent their children from becoming criminals, to which he gave a non-committal answer about daycares. Later on, when the First Lady asked the women in the room about their thoughts on teen crime rates, Eartha Kitt said that the Vietnam War was a major factor. This resulted in Eartha Kitt being investigated by the CIA and blacklisted from performing pretty much anywhere in the US for many years, and she had no choice but to move to Europe during that time. TLDR, a black woman dared to speak her mind to the president and first lady, and they got so offended they ruined her career and sent the CIA after her. She came back in a big way though. Long live Isma. Dominique Mosina was unofficially blacklisted by USA Gymnastics and most of the gymnastics community for sounding the alarm on the Carolias and the abuse and corruption that was happening. While she never named Larry Nassar back then, as far as I know anyway, she did call out a lot of the things that made his abuse possible. Instead of anyone listening, she was called an attention whore with lots of accusations about sour grapes, etc. Was subsequently left out invitations for public appearances at a lot of USAG sponsored events and ostracized by a sizable portion of the gymnastics community. A few years down the road when the Nassar scandal came to light, the stories that were shared suggest she was definitely telling the truth. Even worse, her accusations were barely the tip of the iceberg of what was really going on in USAG. I was also going to say Maggie Nichols, whose career was ruined trying to bring Larry Nassar to justice, but ultimately she was fucking right. Sinead O'Connor had a legitimate grievance against the Catholic Church when she did her Pope ripping on SNL. She got roundly criticized for it at the time, but in retrospect everybody kind of sees her point. I always enjoyed her response to The Guardian when they asked if that moment defined her career. Yes, in a beautiful fucking way. There was no doubt about who this bitch is. There was no more mistaking this woman for a pop star. But it was not derailing. People say, oh, you fucked up your career, but they are talking about the career they had in mind for me. I fucked up the house in Antigua that the record company dudes wanted to buy. I fucked up their career, not mine. It meant I had to make my living playing live, and I am born full of performance. Courtney loved when she spoke out against Harvey Weinstein. Sorta feel like Rose McGowan got the "that bitch is crazy" brush off treatment for same thing. That lady who sued McDonald's after she spilled their coffee in her lap. She was smeared by the media as being a careless moron and or a lying opportunist who was exaggerating in an attempt to get rich. I have clear memories of late night shows and comedians making jokes about what a stupid liar she was. You can Google images of her injuries now, at your own peril. They are gruesome. I can't imagine the pain she went through. Coffee never needs to be hot enough to do that, and they absolutely needed to take precautions to prevent that from happening again. McDonald's had been warned numerous times by the FDA that they were keeping their coffee at dangerously high temperatures. Further, all Stella Lee Beck asked for in her initial filings was to have her medical bills covered. McDonald's repeatedly gave her the back of their hand because they knew exactly how absurd the case would sound to the general public. The late night shows and comedians weren't just joking about an easy target, they were doing McDonald's dirty work for them. Basically every victim of sexual assault by a celebrity, even when the victim is a celebrity themselves. Like Terry Crews. Very brave for a man, particularly a big buff man, to admit to this. Richard Jewell. Great example. The man is truly a hero. There's people alive today that wouldn't be because of his actions, yet he was absolutely destroyed and dragged through the mud. Jimmy Carter appointed Paul Volcker as Fed chair to tackle the rampant stagflation of the 1970s. Inflation rose from 6.5% in 1977 to 11.3% in 1979 and 13.5% in 1980. By comparison, it was 3.5% in 2023. Volcker rapidly raised interest rates. Mortgage rates rose into double digits. By 1980, they were at 14%. This slammed the brakes on the economy and caused unemployment to spike. By the 1980 election, unemployment was at 7.5%. The Volcker recession broke inflation, but cost Carter the election. He lost to Reagan 51% to 41%, 489 EVs to 49. It didn't just break inflation. It held it at bay for the next 40 years. Carter did what had to be done despite the fact that it made him unpopular. Socrates. That's what happens when you keep asking annoying questions. Me, to my 4-year-old, when he keeps asking why. Ignaz Semmelweis. Not sure he was high profile, But he was definitely ruined by doing the right thing. Literally killed because they ignore doing what he deemed as the right thing. Every time I see someone leave the bathroom without washing their hands, I say that Semmelweis is rolling in his grave. I know he was suggesting it for doctors and nurses, but that trickled down to common people. It just irks me. Topher Grace for not being buddy-buddy with his rapist co-star and enablers on that 70s show. Never will watch this show again. I just can't. Greg LeMond, the first American winner of the Tour de France, spoke out about rampant doping and Lance Armstrong and was painted as someone that was jealous and a bitter washed-up retired racer and pushed out of the sport, was outed for being sexually abused as a kid during Floyd Landis's doping trial to try to keep him quiet, had his bike company shut down by track for everything he said to be true. Courtney Love at one point had a fairly promising acting career alongside her music career. She was great in The People vs Larry Flynt, even if people say she was effectively playing herself. She ended up with her acting career disappearing and no reason was ever announced, but once Weinstein was found out and Me Too happened, a video of her from about 05 or maybe earlier warning young girls not to go to his hotel room surfaced. She was asked at a red carpet what advice she had for young girls, and she even said she might get blacklisted for saying this, but she said it anyway and seemingly got blacklisted. I feel so bad for her. First it's Kurt's fans accusing her of murder or at least driving him to suicide, then this. And that doesn't even account for things she went through as a kid. Oliver Billy Sipple saved President Ford's life. Was outed as gay because of it. He began drinking heavily and died regretting his actions. Elizabeth Smart's dad when he hired a homeless man to do some work at his house. Oof.